The last principle I'll mention is process and evolution. This is about understanding that building power is something that happens over time, and it's I'll refer to the diagram. Marshall Gans, who was an organizer with, he left Harvard University, to join Cesar Chavez, and he does a lot of work about grassroots movements. Observed that the social movements, grassroots movements, don't have at the beginning the resources that they will need for the big fights kind of towards the end. And that is a process of building that and hopefully timing it with peaks of intensity over time. And resources can mean dollars and funds. It can mean supporters and people. And I think it can also mean moral authority and moral clarity. And I've been thinking a lot more about this. This is kind of a new thought. But I sense that the moral clarity that I think this movement and the climate justice movement, other movements, food sovereignty movements have started with, is itself growing. The moral clarity to say no to more drilling, to say we have to keep the oil in the ground, to say no to development, to occupy the farm, right, as in the Gill Tract. I think that moral clarity, which communities that have long suffered and fought against the extractive industries in which agriculture today is largely one, that is spreading and growing, and in particular amongst younger people. So I also leave that as a question to consider. So I'll close now just by coming back to a thought about power and the theme that Sarah brought up and others about love, because I think power and love actually really do connect. And so we'll end with a quote from Martin Luther King, one of my favorites. Actually, we won't end with that. Part of the process of that's called suspense. Part of the way that we build, we join people together and go from a movement of just a room of 6 people to 100,000 students participating in some way in Real Food Challenges, to use this Real Food Wheel, which allows everyone to say what is their interest, how did they come to this work, and identify where on the wheel they are and see how it fits into the whole. So that's a graphic we use. So back to where I'll end. Martin Luther King observed that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I wonder if we should talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but it'll probably come up. To me, what ties everything we're all doing together is justice and movements, and you both travel a lot, and you talk about this all the time. And I guess the question is if we can realistically appraise where the food movement is at in the United States and globally, and that's something that each of you can. Because I think we'd agree that you went past your really good-looking wheel very quickly. I'm sure all of you absorbed it, but I was. But I would guess that the gist is no matter what aspect of food or justice you care about, your goal is, at the end of the day, pretty much the same. So the question is, how can we be hopeful? What should we be doing? The questions are, how can we be hopeful? What should we be doing? What direction are we best going in? Mm-hmm. So, sorry, you've had a break, so we'll give Anim a break.
Give you a little break.
Sure, I might take some
water
too.
Sure.
Bottle up. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And we have the oranges here if you want one.
Yeah, I can't eat and think at the same time.
Okay. So, no, I think that's absolutely the question. So thank you for opening with that. I think, what we're seeing is that there's a ton of momentum that's been building. There's, globally, I think the movements around food and food sovereignty in particular have really gotten to scale in ways that we dream of happening in the U.S., but I think there's also a lot happening here. So maybe I'll start with that and then go back to the global. So, what we're seeing in the U.S., so we're excited to be in an alliance called the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance. I think there's some people here who are familiar and have been connected to that, Anna LePay among others. And it's an alliance of groups that are including small-scale farmers, including farm workers, including food justice groups organizing in urban areas and indigenous groups too. And we've been trying to learn over the past 5 years since that alliance has existed about what are some of the major successes and kind of ways forward. I think we've seen a lot of successes at a local level. So, for example, in Maine, there's groups that have won what they're calling food sovereignty ordinances at, in their own local town, saying that farmers have a right to grow food in the way that it makes most sense for them, and rather than being kind of tied up by regulations that prevent them from selling raw milk, for example, or things like that, and selling directly to consumers. So that's something that I think a lot of people are looking at. I think in places like Detroit and in Boston, there's huge movements of communities, including African American communities of color, low-income communities that have been taking over land that's been left vacant for years and turning that into community farms and gardens. And actually, there's a group of folks in Boston that when they visited Detroit at the U.S. Social Forum, a group called Alternatives for Community and Environment, came back and said, you know what, we have to start taking back land in our own communities, and they call it Grow or Die. There's a group called the Urban Farming Institute, which is taking over, which is doing a lot of training of local farmers. So I think we're seeing a lot of exciting things like that. Indigenous communities from Bemidji, Minnesota to Black Mesa, Arizona, I think are really organizing around both in Black Mesa, they've passed tribal resolutions against GMOs and for food sovereignty and seed sovereignty. So that's a really important step at a local level. They're also organizing their own community seed exchanges and taking back what they call traditional lifeways, the ways that indigenous peoples in Arizona have traditionally farmed to conserve water, to preserve the kinds of species of seeds that are really important to them and the stories that go along with them. So I think we're seeing a lot of exciting examples like that. Farm workers who've been organizing, all over the country, but a few examples, community to community in Washington State that's been organizing farm workers. There's a boycott around the Sakuma farms that's been gaining more attention nationally. And they're also, in addition to fighting the bad, trying to build what they want. And so they and the Farm Workers Association of Florida have been saying, let's create our own community farms and community gardens so that farm workers are not only working for other people, but maybe we can actually work for ourselves. Maybe we can control our own food production, and seeing that as another step. So I think there's a lot of exciting examples, even right here in the Bay. You mentioned Occupy the Farm. Also, I know there's a group in San Francisco called People Organizing to Defend Environmental and Economic Rights that's been doing a lot around local food and community gardens and taking back community space. Urban Tilth is a group in Richmond, California that's been doing really great work with youth organizing around food. So I feel like we have a lot of exciting models happening at the local level, and there's efforts to try to connect them more to one another. That's one of the things I think the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance is trying to do. There's a Climate Justice Alliance that we're also part of that has community groups most impacted by climate change around the country, and are looking now at what's a national platform we could have around food justice and food sovereignty. So I think there's a lot of momentum building on that, and I think the challenges are how do we take the local examples and then build up so that people have more power collectively, so we can both learn from what people have been doing locally, but also put out a national vision and strategy. And I think you've been having some conversations, which I think would be great to talk more about related to HEAL and things like that. But yeah, that's some of what I've been seeing here. And I think there's also broader, what you would call broader food movements, not just food sovereignty or food justice, but obviously people all over who've been just caring more about food and looking into where does it come from and how do we make decisions about that.